I stared at the NDA in front of me, my signature still fresh, the ink barely dry. My hands rested on the smooth mahogany conference table, the same one I'd sat at for years while helping build what we all once called the dream. 8 years of 70-hour work weeks, 8 years of missed birthdays, ramen-fueled brainstorms, sleepless product launches, and desperate funding rounds. And now, it was over. Just like that. Across from me sat Nathan Cross, our CEO. He leaned back casually in his chair, like this was just another Wednesday. His perfectly tailored suit and smug half-smile made me feel like I was some rookie intern being let go after a summer program, not the co-founder who had been with him since day one. "We've decided to bring in someone with a more seasoned perspective," he said, as if that made any of this easier. "Let's be honest, Jessica. You were never the reason we got this far anyway." The words hit like ice water to the face. I kept my expression neutral, though I felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. My throat tightened, but I managed to nod. "Understood," I said, my voice even, professional to the end. "That's me, Jessica Hale, former COO and co-founder of Novalink." Nathan didn't even look up again as I stood to leave. His attention was already back on his laptop, probably emailing the board about the smooth transition. I walked through the glass-paneled office for the last time, passing by the engineers, designers, and junior staff who had no idea this was my final walkthrough. Some were working on systems I had personally optimized. Others were debugging code I had helped rewrite at 3 a.m. just 2 weeks ago. No one looked up. No one knew. I passed by Mia, one of our interns turned devs, who gave me a warm smile. "Heading out early?" she asked. "Yeah," I replied. Something like that. My office was already boxed up. Just one small cardboard cube, a ceramic mug, a framed photo of my brother and me at Novalink's first pitch night, and a notebook filled with sketches from our early development days. That was all that remained. But what Nathan didn't know, what he had never bothered to pay attention to, was that I had kept meticulous records. Every feature roadmap, every investor pitch deck revision, every product timeline with my initials beside key decisions. Not to mention the full process documentation I had created for our core platform optimization, the one that landed us the $10 million Series A. He thought he could erase me. But I had learned something long ago from watching my mother build her own business from the ground up and then lose it in a shady merger. You never walk into a war without receipts. As I rode the elevator down from the 16th floor, the weight of it all started to settle. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just stunned, disoriented. But more than that, I was beginning to see things clearly, maybe for the first time in years. Novalink had become my life. I had sacrificed relationships, stability, even my health to make it work. And now, the man who once called me his right hand had discarded me like a stepping stone he no longer needed. I reached my car, started the engine, and sat still for a moment, letting silence fill the space. Then I picked up my phone and called Marlene, my attorney. "It's done," I said. "I'm so sorry, Jess," she replied, calm and composed as always. "Did he say why?" I repeated Nathan's words, each one still echoing like a slap in my ear. Marlene was quiet for a beat. Then, "You've still got the files?" "Everyone," I confirmed. "Good. We'll talk tomorrow. I think it's time we go over your options." I drove home with the kind of quiet resolve that comes after betrayal, when the tears haven't come yet, but your mind is already calculating, not for revenge, but for reckoning. That night, I sat on my living room floor with a glass of wine in one hand and my laptop in the other. I opened a folder titled Nova, Original IP, and started scrolling through files. Code versions, pitch memos, contracts, time-stamped architecture diagrams. Nathan didn't think I mattered, but he was about to find out just how much I had built, and just how much they needed me when the cracks began to show. He thought this was the end of my story, but really, it was just the beginning. 3 weeks had passed since I left Novalink, or rather, since I was removed. I hadn't touched my work laptop since. I let the Slack messages pile up, the shared docs sit unread, and the LinkedIn notifications pour in. At first, it was like a phantom limb. I kept reaching for projects that weren't mine anymore, deadlines I no longer owned. But slowly, the silence became comforting. I started going to sleep before midnight. I rediscovered what weekends felt like. But despite the calm, there was a quiet tension humming beneath everything. The kind you feel when you know something's about to break. Nathan hadn't reached out. No one from the board had. It was as if I had been scrubbed from Novalink's history the moment I walked out the door. But I wasn't worried. Not really. I knew something they didn't. You don't rip out your company's foundation and expect the house to stand. I hadn't designed Novalink's systems to be difficult, but they were custom, built from the ground up by me. They were efficient, lean, but highly specific. And while I had documented the essentials, the real logic, the problem-solving pathways, the performance tricks, those lived in my head and in files that weren't shared. I'd warned Nathan months ago that we needed redundancy and knowledge. I'd suggested training workshops. Not a priority, he'd said. We'll scale first, then clean it up later. He never liked being told there was a crack in his masterpiece. So now, I waited. Then, on a rainy Tuesday morning, the first crack reached me. I was sipping coffee at a local cafe when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, but a minute later, a message came in. Text from Brian, Senior Dev, Novalink. Hey, Jessica. Sorry to bother you. Just wondering if you have a minute to answer a quick question about the data sync protocols you implemented in version 3? I stared at the screen. V3. That was the version we released right before the Series A. The one that doubled user retention. The one built on my load balancing model. No way Brian had the documentation for that. Nathan had once referred to it as Jessica's black box magic. I didn't reply. Not yet. The next day, another text. This time from Kara, our lead UX engineer. Hi, Jess. Weird question. Do you remember where you stored the fallback scripts for the dashboard analytics? We're having some weird UI conflicts since the last deployment. I blinked at the message. That dashboard hadn't been touched in 6 months. What had they done? And then, on Thursday, a third message. This one from Ethan, the junior engineer I had mentored from his internship days. Hey, Jessica. I know it's not my place, but things are falling apart here. Troy doesn't know how to manage the system you built, and he's blaming the dev team. People are scared. Just thought you should know. So, Troy is struggling. The real professional Nathan had brought in to replace me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I stared at the text for a while. I wanted to be angry. Should have been. But all I felt was this cold, hollow ache. I had loved that company. Loved the people. The mission. It had been more than work. And now it was rotting from the inside out. I called Marlene. They're starting to reach out, I told her. Devs, engineers, even the intern. She was silent for a beat. And what are you going to do? I exhaled. Nothing. Not yet. You're sure? Yes, Nathan made his decision. I'm just watching the consequences play out. Smart, she said. We let them sink just enough to realize who held the life raft all along. The next morning, I received an email. Not from a dev, but from a client. Subject? Urgent, Novalink platform issue. From Sarah Jameson at bridgeware.com. Hi, Jessica. I know you're no longer at Novalink, but our team is having serious trouble with the API integration you originally helped us with. The new engineering contact hasn't been responsive, and we're considering pulling our contract. Is there any way you can point us in the right direction? A client was reaching out to me. Not support. Not the company. Me. That meant something. Bridgeware was one of our largest B2B clients. If they were on the verge of walking, the board would panic. And that panic wouldn't take long to spread. I didn't respond to Sarah's email. Not yet. But I did forward it to Marlene with one line. It's starting. She called me 10 minutes later. We're going to need to talk strategy, she said. I nodded slowly. Because sooner or later, Nathan's going to call. And when he does, she said, we make sure he understands that this time, it's on your terms. By week 4, Novalink was starting to look like a house with termites. From the outside, it still stood tall. The website was still live. Their press release from 2 weeks ago talked about exciting new changes and strong leadership. But underneath it all, the damage was spreading. Every few days, I'd hear whispers through the tech community. Clients complaining about support delays. Developers posting on anonymous forums about broken systems and botched deployments. One even hinted at internal conflict on the leadership team. Fingers pointing in every direction, but never at the right one. Troy, the so-called real professional, had taken over everything I built. And from what I could tell, he was breaking it piece by piece. That Thursday, I was meeting with Marlene at her office. We were reviewing my original code documentation, organizing time-stamped development logs, and compiling the emails I'd exchanged with Nathan over the years, especially the ones where I had explicitly explained the architecture, and he had replied with his usual, "Looks great, Jess," without reading a word of it. This is more than thorough, Marlene said, tapping one of the printed threads. You could make a very strong case for misattributed ownership if this escalates. I don't want to sue them, I said. She looked up. I don't want revenge, Marlene. I want acknowledgement. I want them to say it out loud. That I mattered. That they can't function without me. That they were wrong. She nodded slowly. You don't need to destroy them. You just need them to admit the truth. And right on cue, that afternoon, my phone rang. Caller ID. Nathan Cross. I let it go to voicemail. He called again 10 minutes later. Then came the text. Nathan. Jessica. I think it's time we talked. There's been some unforeseen complications. Could really use your expertise for a short consultation. We're happy to compensate you generously. I stared at the message, half smiling. Generously. Funny how quickly the man who once told me I was never the reason we got this far was now scrambling to bring me back. I didn't reply. Not immediately. Instead, I forwarded the message to Marlene. He's calling. Told you he would. She replied seconds later. Let him sweat. The longer he waits, the higher your value rises. By the next day, 3 more messages came in from Nathan. The tone changed with each one. First polite, then urgent, then vaguely apologetic. Look, Jess, I might have been harsh during your exit. That wasn't personal. You know how pressure gets in this business. Let's talk? I waited until Sunday to reply. Hi, Nathan. I'm currently busy with other engagements. Can't take on new work right now, but I appreciate the offer. Hope things at Novalink are going well. Short, polite, non-committal. He called again immediately. I answered this time, just to hear the panic in his voice. Jessica, thank God. Listen, I know things got tense, but we really need your help. Troy's been having trouble with some of your systems and, well, it's causing delays. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, sipping my tea. But I'm not sure how I can help. I no longer work there, remember? Don't be like this, he said. I'm offering real compensation, 6 figures for a short-term contract. I paused. That's very generous, but I have to ask, didn't you say I was never the reason Novalink got this far? There was silence on the other end, then a cough. I may have underestimated your role. Look, the product isn't functioning the way it used to. Clients are angry. The dev team's overwhelmed. We need your insight. I let the silence stretch out. Then, let me think about it. I hung up without saying goodbye. Later that night, Marlene and I met for a late dinner. I told her everything. He's desperate, I said, but not desperate enough to admit what he did. Yet, Marlene corrected, smirking. But give it time. A few more missed deadlines, a few more lost clients, and he'll be saying your name like a prayer. I looked down at the menu but wasn't reading it. I don't want to go back there. but I do want to be the one they have to come to when everything's falling apart. You already are, she said. They just don't realize it fully yet. I smiled faintly. And for the first time since being fired, I felt it. Not just relief, not just satisfaction. Power. It was a quiet kind of power. The kind built not on revenge, but truth. Earned, not taken. And I was just getting started. By the 6th week after I'd left Novalink, my phone wasn't just buzzing with texts from desperate developers or frustrated clients. This time, the message came from someone higher up. Subject: Quick chat? From Rachel.Langston@brightedgecapital.com. Rachel Langston, one of our Series A investors. I remembered her clearly. Sharp-eyed, brilliant, always the quietest voice in the room during pitch meetings, but somehow the most influential. If Rachel was reaching out, something big had shifted. I opened the email. Hi, Jessica. I hope you're doing well. I'd like to have a quick conversation about Novalink, specifically about some of the recent platform issues and your role in the original architecture. Could you spare 20 minutes this week? She wasn't asking for gossip. Rachel never wasted time. She wanted facts. And the fact was, Novalink was crumbling without the foundation I'd built. I forwarded the message to Marlene. Her response was almost instant. Talk to her. Just be careful. No details that breach the NDA, but general insight about your early work is fair game, especially anything that predates your employment contract. We scheduled a Zoom call for Wednesday afternoon. When Rachel appeared on screen, she looked exactly the same. Sleek black blazer, immaculate bun, no-nonsense gaze. Jessica, she said, offering a polite smile. Thank you for taking the time. Of course, I've heard Novalink's had a rough few weeks. Her smile tightened. That's putting it kindly. I waited. I'll get straight to it, she continued. We've lost 2 major clients in the last 10 days. They cited platform instability and poor communication. When we pressed the executive team for clarity, we got vague answers. I said nothing. Rachel raised an eyebrow. But then someone forwarded me an internal memo, a message from one of the junior engineers. He mentioned something interesting, that the authentication and integration systems were entirely your design, and that since your departure, no one's been able to fully manage them. I took a breath. The architecture you're referring to? Yes, I built it. From scratch. Before we had funding, before we had a CTO, before there was even a product roadmap. She nodded slowly. So what happened? You'd have to ask Nathan, I said carefully, though I imagine he'd say they needed someone with more experience. Rachel didn't flinch. He told us you were heavily involved in implementation, but not in the core strategy. I smiled. That's interesting, because I still have the whiteboard photos from our first planning sessions. My handwriting, my diagrams, my Git logs with timestamps from months before we pitched BrightEdge. Rachel's expression changed. Barely, but enough. I'm not here to cause problems, I added. I'm just no longer interested in being erased. I respect that, she said. And I want to be clear. I'm not trying to trap you into breaching any agreements. But I need to know, is the core platform something only you fully understood? I built the authentication layer myself, the load balancing system, the back-end failover sequence, and a good portion of the dashboard logic. All customized, all optimized specifically for Novalink's user flow. She nodded again. And Troy? I asked. How's he handling it? She didn't answer, but she didn't have to. I see, I said. We sat in silence for a moment. I'll be frank, Jessica, Rachel said finally. We're holding an internal meeting with the other investors this Friday. There's concern about leadership, about misrepresentation. I'd like you to attend. Strictly as an observer, if that's more comfortable. I'll need to speak with my attorney. Of course. After the call, I sat staring at the blank screen. There was a familiar fire rising in my chest. Not anger, exactly, but the unmistakable feeling that the tide was shifting. the same feeling I had during our first funding meeting, the day we received our initial $250,000 angel check. Back when it was still a dream. I called Marlene and explained everything. "Rachel Langston wants me in that room," I said. "That means the board is starting to see the cracks Nathan tried to cover up. She wants you there to speak or to sit. She said I could be an observer, but you and I both know if I show up, they'll ask questions, and I'll have answers." There was a pause on the other end. "Then we prepare," Marlene said. Friday morning came with a gray sky and a tension I could feel in my spine. I arrived at Bright Edge Capital's downtown office 20 minutes early. Marlene walked beside me, crisp in her navy blazer, carrying a leather folder that held more power than anyone in that building probably realized. "Remember," she said as we reached the glass doors, "you're not here for revenge. You're here for recognition and leverage. Let the truth speak for itself." I nodded, though I could feel my pulse in my neck. Inside, the conference room was quiet but charged. Around the long table sat Rachel Langston and two other Bright Edge partners, one from a strategic tech fund I recognized. Across from them, Nathan, Troy, and two Novalink board members who looked like they hadn't slept in days. Nathan's face paled the moment he saw me. He hadn't been warned. "Jessica," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I didn't realize you'd be joining us." "I was invited," I replied smoothly, taking a seat beside Rachel. "As an observer." Troy looked down at the table. The meeting began with Rachel laying out the agenda. On the surface, it was about performance issues, missed targets, and client dissatisfaction. But everyone knew what was really happening: a leadership reckoning. "We've seen a 17% drop in enterprise usage over the past month," Rachel stated, flipping through a report. "Support wait times have doubled. There's been churn in your dev team, and your last software release caused 3 major client systems to crash." Nathan shifted in his seat. "We're aware of the issues. We've been working around the clock to stabilize." "And yet," said one of the other investors, "we're hearing the same thing over and over from technical staff and clients alike. We don't understand the system. Jessica Hale built it." My name landed like a hammer. Nathan opened his mouth, but I spoke first. "I won't speak to Novalink's current operations," I said carefully, "but I can confirm that the core systems, including the architecture, security framework, and internal tools, were developed and implemented by me. I wrote the original codebase. I documented the structure. I maintained version control until my departure." Rachel nodded. "We've reviewed her documentation. It's extensive, time-stamped, verified." Nathan leaned forward, his tone tight. "With all due respect, Jessica wasn't acting alone. She was under contract. Everything created during her time here belongs to the company." Marlene didn't even blink. "You're referring to the standard employment agreement, which we reviewed extensively. But the authentication layer, the system that powers Novalink's client security and data sync, was originally developed by Jessica before her employment began. She has GitHub repositories dating back a year prior. She integrated it into Novalink with full transparency. There is no signed IP transfer agreement covering pre-existing work." Silence. Dead. Heavy silence. Troy finally spoke, voice barely audible. "I wasn't able to reverse engineer it. We've tried. It's too customized." I glanced at him. He looked exhausted, not arrogant anymore, just small. One of the board members, Alan, I think, looked directly at Nathan. "You told us the system had full redundancy, that we could scale with or without Jessica." Nathan swallowed. I believed that was true. Rachel turned to me. "Jessica, if you had stayed, what would you have done differently?" I hesitated, then answered honestly. "Trained internal engineers, built a knowledge base, created sustainability, but none of that was ever prioritized. I brought it up. Multiple times." Marlene slid a printed email across the table. Nathan's reply was bolded at the top. "That's not a priority right now. We'll fix the documentation post-funding." Rachel took a deep breath and turned to the board. I think the situation is clear. The integrity of Novalink's product relies on a system we do not fully control, built by someone no longer employed, and now being misrepresented as internally owned. What are you suggesting? One of the board members asked. Two things, Rachel said, eyes locked on Nathan. First, a formal correction of the record. Second, a licensing agreement with Jessica Hale for use of the authentication framework, with fair compensation and clear attribution. And Nathan? Another investor asked, voice sharp. Rachel didn't hesitate. That's for the board to decide. Nathan looked at me then. No longer smug, no longer superior, just cornered. I said nothing. I didn't have to. 2 weeks after the investor meeting, the news broke. Novalink announces leadership restructuring amid technical turmoil. The press release didn't mention Nathan by name, but the tech blogs filled in the blanks. Within days, LinkedIn lit up with rumors. Quiet reshuffling, exits, a temporary advisory role for the former CEO. Meanwhile, a new name was trending on the platform. Mine. Jessica Hale, the mind behind Novalink's architecture. It felt surreal. After years of being invisible behind code and investor decks, suddenly I wasn't just the one who got fired. I was the architect they couldn't function without. Rachel Langston reached out again. This time, not as an investor cleaning up a mess, but as a strategist with a proposal. We want to reestablish stability, she said, publicly and internally. The board unanimously supports offering you a formal position, CTO, with full creative control of the technical team. We'll handle the PR. You name the terms. I didn't answer right away, not because I was unsure, but because I was still processing how much had changed, and how quickly. The girl who once begged for a seat at the table was now being asked what color she wanted her chair to be. And then, like clockwork, my phone rang. Nathan. Again. I let it ring twice before answering. Hi, Nathan. He sounded tired, humbled. Jessica, I wanted to call and say thank you. For what? I asked, keeping my voice even. For not throwing me under the bus in front of the investors. You did that on your own, I replied, not unkindly. Just honest. He sighed. I messed up. I know that. I got caught up in appearances, optics. I didn't see the foundation because I was too focused on the spotlight. And now? Now I see it. I see everything you did. Everything you built. And I wanted to say I'm sorry. There was a beat of silence. A year ago, I might have cried hearing those words. Now I just felt still. I appreciate the apology, I said, and I truly hope you learn from this. I will, he said. I already have. We hung up without another word. That same evening, I met with Marlene to finalize the licensing agreement. It was clean, airtight, and heavily in my favor. I'd retain ownership of the authentication system and receive royalties for its continued use in Novalink's platform. More importantly, a public statement would be released the following week, correcting the record. I would no longer be the ghost in Novalink's history. The next morning, I stepped into Novalink's office for the first time in nearly 2 months. Not as an employee, but as a licensed partner and newly appointed CTO. The place looked the same, but it felt different. Developers glanced up as I passed. Some whispered. Ethan, my former intern, now a full-fledged engineer, grinned and walked over. You're back? He asked, eyes wide. In a way, I said, smiling. Later that afternoon, I held a meeting with the entire tech team. I didn't come in with threats or blame. I came with a plan. We're rebuilding from the inside out, I told them. Not just code, culture, documentation. Trust they listened. They leaned in. And by the end of the hour, for the first time in a long time, I saw real belief return to their eyes. Over the next few weeks, we made changes. Hiring new talent, restoring confidence, fixing broken systems. Clients who had left started coming back. Investor faith was being restored, and the team was thriving. But more than anything, I was thriving. I no longer had to prove my worth in silence. I no longer had to watch someone else take credit for my sweat. One afternoon, after a particularly smooth product rollout, I received an email from a recruiter. Then another. Then a third. Not just offering jobs, offering partnerships. And that's when it really hit me. Nathan's phone had started ringing when things fell apart. But now mine was ringing for something else entirely. Possibilities. A month later, I stood on a small stage at a Women in Tech summit, delivering a talk I'd once dreamed of giving. When I was fired from the company I helped build, I said, I thought it was the end of the story. But it wasn't. It was just the part where I stopped surviving and started building something better. For myself. On my own terms. Applause filled the room. After the talk, a young developer approached me. She looked nervous. I don't mean to be weird, she said, but your story kind of saved me. I was about to quit tech altogether, but now, maybe I'll stay, just long enough to build something of my own. I smiled. Good, I said. Just remember, the foundation they try to bury you under is often the one you end up standing on. And that was the truth. I didn't rise by tearing anyone down. I rose because I remembered who I was, and this time no one would forget it. I knew something was off the moment Lucas called me into his office with that forced corporate cheerfulness, the kind that usually precedes either a team-building retreat or a layoff. Ashley, he said, grinning like a politician in election week. We've got a new intern joining us, just fresh from Columbia. Finance whiz, apparently. You two will be a great team. Right. Like a shark and a seal are a great team. I'd been working in payroll compliance for 7 years. Built the current system from scratch. Not sexy work, but clean. Precise. Bulletproof. And now I was supposed to train the intern? Sure, I've seen this move before. It's not mentoring. It's replacement with a smile. Still, I played along. Happy to help, I said, matching his fake cheer with something dangerously close to sarcasm. The intern's name was Brian. Bright-eyed, overdressed, and way too confident for someone who still had his school ID in his wallet. He bounced into the room like he thought it was a TED Talk, shook my hand too hard and said, "Looking forward to learning everything you do." I bet you are. We started slow. I walked him through vendor routing and automated audits. He nodded like he understood, but typed like a raccoon on Red Bull. Every 5 minutes, another question. Every 10, another suggestion. Why don't we just switch to a plug-and-play API? Can't we automate the approval flow using AI? I smiled. Patient. Helpful. Inside, I was screaming. You don't automate nuance. You don't AI integrity. Lucas kept hovering near our desks like a helicopter parent with a severance package in his pocket. Everything good? He'd ask, pretending to sip coffee he never drank. Great, I'd reply, without looking up. He's learning fast. What I didn't say, he's watching faster, because Brian already knew too much. He asked about systems I hadn't shown him yet. Clicked through folders he shouldn't have had access to. And one morning, I caught him flipping through archived bonus memos like he was studying for a pop quiz I never gave. Still, I said nothing. Just logged everything. Quiet. Professional. Careful. And then came the lunch meeting. Lucas insisted I join him and the regional CEO, Mr. Zhang, along with Brian, as a bonding exercise. I should have known. The restaurant was one of those sleek places downtown with soft jazz, tiny plates, and prices that assume you never check your bank account. Polished floors, glass walls, chopsticks preset. I sat across from Lucas, Brian to my right, Mr. Zhang beside him. Lucas ordered fast. Knew the menu. Too eager. Brian nodded along like a ventriloquist's dummy. Then Lucas leaned in toward Mr. Zhang and said something, low and fast in Mandarin. I caught every syllable. She doesn't know we'll fire her after this. Pity, she looks like she works hard. My chopsticks froze midair. Lucas chuckled, pleased with himself. Mr. Zhang didn't laugh, just nodded politely. Brian gave a confused smile, clearly missing the punchline. And I? I blinked once, set my chopsticks down, reached for my tea. Because what Lucas didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had lived in Hangzhou for 5 years, finished my graduate degree at Zhejiang University, read, wrote, and spoke Mandarin like I was born to it. I had filed pension audits in Chinese more complex than anything Lucas could manage in English. But more importantly, I knew when someone was digging my grave and smiling while they did it. I said nothing. Not then. Just sipped my tea and filed his words away like evidence in a sealed folder. Because that moment wasn't the betrayal. It was the confirmation. The betrayal had started months ago, when Lucas cut my team budget with no explanation, reassigned key accounts to younger employees, and suddenly started CCing Brian on sensitive emails with subject lines like transition planning. They weren't grooming Brian to help me. They were grooming him to replace me. But Lucas made one mistake. He thought language was a wall. He didn't realize it was my weapon. And now? Now I wasn't documenting to save myself. I was documenting to bury him. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about principle. About the silent workers who keep the wheels turning while others take the credit. About the quiet women in meetings whose names never make the slide deck. And most of all, this was about timing. And mine was just getting started. The day after that lunch, something shifted. Not in them. In me. Lucas strolled past my desk like nothing had happened, tapping his coffee cup and saying, Ashley, can you forward Brian those compliance logs from Q1? He's eager to dive deeper. Deeper, huh? I smiled without showing teeth. Of course, I'll clean them up first. I didn't mean sanitize, I meant set the trap. I opened a new folder on my private drive and labeled it. Stage 1, watch them hang themselves. Inside it, copies of the logs with specific rows labeled in Mandarin. Nothing too suspicious, just enough to seem like leftover notes from an old audit. Because here's the thing. If Lucas or Brian actually understood what they were reading, they'd know those labels didn't belong to Q1. They belonged to a confidential internal investigation we ran back in 2021. A test file, meaning Brian had no business touching it. I didn't have to bait him. Just leave breadcrumbs. Sure enough, an hour later, I saw the file open on the shared server, then again in the system access log. Brian had copied it to his desktop. Perfect. Meanwhile, Lucas sent me a message on Slack, casual tone barely masking the push. Quick heads up, I'm bringing Brian to next week's compliance meeting. Think it's time he gets exposure to real-time oversight. Exposure, that's what they called it now. I typed back, great initiative. I'll prep him with context beforehand. Translation? I'll feed him just enough information to get him caught. That week, I started mislabeling low-priority folders, renamed archived training decks with legal-sounding acronyms, changed column headings from vendor contact to VC attestation, normal enough to overlook, strange enough to trip anyone pretending to know what they were doing. And Brian tripped. Hard. In the Thursday meeting, when the head of legal asked about our latest vendor onboarding batch, Brian jumped in confidently. Well, he said, scanning his tablet, according to the VC Attestation Index, all entries meet the FTL thresholds for Q2. The room went still. FTL? That wasn't a threshold. It was a placeholder I made up during testing. Fake term limit. I used it once. In 2019. As a joke. Lucas blinked. The head of legal cocked her head. What threshold exactly does FTL measure? Brian stammered. Uh, Vendor authorization to, invoice limits? She smiled politely. There is no such term in our system. Brian looked at Lucas. Lucas looked at me. I kept a straight face and took a sip of coffee. That should have been the wake-up call. But Lucas wasn't someone who backed off. He was the kind of guy who doubled down, sure he could talk his way out of anything. Or at least blame his way out of it. The next morning, I caught a whiff of desperation. He called me into a side room, that fake concerned expression stretched thin on his face. Hey, Ashley. Just wanted to check in. You've been a bit quiet lately. Everything good? I nodded. Very good. Just focusing. He leaned in like he was about to offer me stock tips. You know, Brian's rough around the edges, but he's sharp. Give him space to grow, okay? You've got a lot of institutional memory. Just don't make it too hard to follow. Translation: dumb it down for the boy genius so he can steal it faster. I tilted my head. Of course, I'll make things easier. He smiled, satisfied, and walked out like he'd won something. But I'd already won. Because earlier that morning, I'd added a silent listener to our document approval platform. Every file Brian touched would now forward an auto notification to a folder shared with our overseas audit team. And remember Mr. Zhang, the regional CEO from lunch? Yeah, I hadn't forgotten him either. He hadn't laughed at Lucas's joke, hadn't encouraged it, just nodded, stoic, unreadable. But when I'd passed him in the hallway the following Monday, I gave him the smallest bow and said softly in Mandarin, "Thank you for the lunch meeting. I learned a lot." He froze for half a second. Then he smiled. Not wide, not warm, but sharp, knowing. He knew I'd understood everything, and from that moment, I wasn't invisible anymore. That's when the pieces really began to shift. Because while Lucas was busy bragging about succession strategy and private calls, and Brian was giving feedback on processes he barely understood, I was already compiling the file. Every altered doc Brian saved. Every access timestamp Lucas accidentally edited. Every joke made in a language they assumed I couldn't hear. They thought I was being quiet because I was scared. I was quiet because I was building something. Something slow. Something cold. And something irreversible. By the third week, Lucas had stopped pretending. He no longer masked his micromanagement behind mentorship. He skipped pleasantries, stopped asking how I was doing, and started doing what men like him always do when they sense a woman's spine straightening. He got louder, bolder, and careless. "Let's just move faster," he snapped during one morning meeting, waving his hand as if my presentation had personally insulted him. Ashley's methods are thorough, sure, but we don't need gold-plated compliance. We need agility. Brian nodded like a bobblehead. Exactly. We could probably cut out half the approval flow without risk. I blinked. Without risk? Brian opened his mouth to reply, but Lucas cut in. Ashley, we appreciate your legacy processes, but we're modernizing. Brian's been talking to a few tech partners who could streamline the whole thing. I looked at him, then at Brian. Then I said the most dangerous sentence I could muster, calm and clipped. If you'd like to restructure payroll compliance without understanding it, you'll need to speak with legal. Lucas smirked, eyes narrowing. We'll loop them in when we're ready. That was the final clue. They weren't just planning to replace me. They were planning to break what I built, repackage it, and slap their names on the box. And worse, they didn't even understand how much damage that would do. They thought payroll was just numbers. They didn't see the regulatory landmines, the cross-border tax complications, the delicate timing of payments across jurisdictions. You screw it up once, you don't get a memo, you get an audit. But they weren't going to wait for that. They were going to fake stability until the next quarterly review. So I gave them exactly what they wanted. I started sending Brian training decks labeled things like streamlined approval pathways, version 3, and optimized audit exemptions. On the surface, they looked legitimate, clean, sleek. Inside, they were poison. Because every example I gave, every sample file and diagram was built on outdated rules, loopholes we'd patched years ago, test cases that never made it past legal, and just enough real data to look convincing. Brian ate it up like candy. "Wow, this is so much cleaner than what I've been reading in the docs," he messaged one afternoon. "Why didn't we implement this sooner?" "Because we didn't want to get sued, Brian." But I didn't say that. I just replied, "Some things take time." Meanwhile, Lucas kept circling like a vulture, pretending to be a visionary. He started pitching a cost-neutral revamp of payroll to the executive team. Called it Project Phoenix. Sent out a teaser deck at the end of the week with buzzwords like resilient, lean forward, and digitally harmonized. I almost gagged. He even added a testimonial quote on slide 9. "The new system eliminates redundancy while improving clarity. Ashley T., Senior, Payroll Compliance Manager." My quote. Except I never said that. He pulled it from an email I wrote 2 years ago about something entirely different. I screenshotted it, added it to the folder labeled Fabrications. By then, the file had over 130 items. Slack threads, backdated approvals, screenshots of Brian editing permissions he didn't have, emails Lucas sent to third-party contractors requesting sample automation tools that would bypass our existing checks entirely. But the real nail came on a Thursday. Brian sent a file to legal, without me. A reconciliation report for a vendor contract. He copied Lucas. The email read, "Per Ashley's recent changes to the vendor flow, this should now qualify under auto-approve." Only I hadn't changed anything. And I hadn't spoken to Brian that day. I opened the file. He'd manually adjusted the approval threshold, lowered it by 40%. The vendor in question? A known red flag we'd frozen last quarter. I felt my hands tighten around the mouse. Slowly, deliberately, I started pulling metadata. Brian hadn't just sent a bad file. He'd used my template, my formatting, and he'd listed me as the source. Lucas knew. He was setting me up to take the fall for whatever shortcuts they were planning. So I made a decision. I crafted a message in Mandarin. Formal, measured. The kind of language that doesn't just translate, it slices. "Mr. Zhang, I've identified several changes being attributed to my office without authorization. I've attached samples for your review. These documents have not gone through proper compliance, and I'm concerned they may be escalated as final. No accusations, no drama. Just a quiet knock on the right door." He responded 12 minutes later. "Understood. Please continue documenting. We'll review internally." And that was it. No follow-ups, no requests, just a single green light. But I knew what it meant. Because when silence comes from the top, it's not indifference. It's strategy. By the start of the next week, the office felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just tense. The kind of tense where people start saying good morning a little too quickly. Where Slack pings slow down. Where eyes dart, but no one asks questions. Lucas didn't know yet. But Mr. Zhang had started watching. And I had begun tightening the noose. It started small. I filed a request with IT for an access audit. "Just routine," I said. "Quarterly check." Nobody questioned it, because I was the one who normally handled those. Within 24 hours, I had a report detailing who accessed which files and when. Brian had been inside the payroll sandbox 3 times in the past week. One of those times? He used an admin override that only 2 people had, me and Lucas, except I'd revoked my own override 6 months ago after the last audit. Lucas didn't know that. So how did Brian get in? Answer. Lucas gave him his credentials. Now, in a healthy company, that alone would trigger a security review. But Lucas ran the department like his own little kingdom. So I did what I always did. I documented. Then I uploaded the report into the growing dossier labeled Phoenix Fraud. I didn't just want to expose them. I wanted everything traceable. Because the truth is, Men like Lucas don't fall because they mess up. They fall when everyone sees it at the same time. So I prepared the moment. I organized every false email, altered approval, and fake attribution into a master folder. I cross-referenced each with our compliance policies. Then I translated the entire thing into Mandarin, twice. Once in business formal for Mr. Zhang, once in legal formality for Tokyo HQ. I added a single note in both versions. Please review. Discrepancies between actual policy and implementation may lead to reputational risk if left unaddressed. I didn't sign it emotionally. I didn't ask for help. I just presented truth. Clean, sharp, and weaponized. And I sent it. Not directly to Lucas, not to legal, but to Mayu, Mr. Zhang's personal assistant. The same Mayu who used to sit in our board meetings with a calm smile and a sharper mind than all of us combined. She was quiet, almost invisible, until you realized she was the one whispering in the CEO's ear before every decision. I hadn't seen her in person in over a year, but I still had her contact. She replied the next morning with only 2 words. I see. That was all I needed. The real shift came Thursday afternoon during a team meeting where Lucas introduced new operational efficiencies. He walked in late, of course, holding a smoothie he never drank, wearing that smug expression like he just closed a deal with NASA. We're going to streamline the approval process, he said, nodding toward Brian. We've been testing a prototype flow, thanks to Brian's great work, and we'll begin implementation next quarter. No mention of me. No mention that the prototype was built using fake compliance files and bypassed controls. He clicked through the slides like he was auditioning for a keynote, all graphs and jargon, ending with a bullet point that read, Ashley will transition to an advisory role for knowledge retention. Knowledge retention? Like I was a bookshelf. I sat still, face unreadable. Then Brian jumped in. Also, we've already rolled out most of the changes Ashley outlined in her earlier notes, so it should be a smooth handoff. Except I'd outlined none of that. Lucas looked at me. Ashley, you've been a great support in this transition. We're grateful for your adaptability. Adaptability. A sanitized way of saying, thanks for training your replacement. Now go quietly. I smiled. Happy to contribute. Let me know when you're ready for the formal transition memo. He nodded, clueless. What he didn't know? That memo had already been sent, just not to him. Because 2 hours before that meeting, an email went out from Tokyo HQ, not internally, externally, to our audit partners, to legal, to the board. Subject line, compliance irregularities under review, payroll department attached were 3 files. 1. An access audit with unauthorized admin overrides. 2nd, a reconciliation report showing altered thresholds. 3rd, an attribution map showing my name attached to documents I never touched. Each file translated, timestamped, verified. And underneath it all, a line that read, submitted by Ashley T., Senior Compliance Officer for urgent review. Fluency in Mandarin certified. Cross-reference recommended. The trap was sprung, but I wasn't done, because traps don't just expose, they humiliate. I had one more move. The meeting invite came late Sunday night. Subject, payroll review and organizational realignment, mandatory attendance. No agenda, no details, just a Zoom link and 2 names attached in the sender field. Mr. Zhang, Mayu Tanaka. I didn't reply. I just read it twice and smiled. By Monday morning, the entire department was vibrating with silent dread. Lucas walked in with his usual swagger, but his smile was too tight. His shirt too crisp. I could smell the cologne from across the room. The same one he only used for board meetings or when he knew he was about to be cornered and wanted to mask the sweat. Brian wasn't bouncing anymore either, just sitting hunched over his laptop like he was trying to solve world hunger in Excel. I didn't say a word to either of them. At 10:01 a.m., the call started. Mr. Zhang appeared first. Calm, composed, unreadable. Then Mayu joined. Perfect as always. Navy blazer, no background filter, no small talk. Lucas started speaking immediately, voice a touch too loud. Thank you for making the time. Just wanted to align with Tokyo on the changes we've been implementing in payroll, especially under the new Phoenix structure. He smiled, gestured toward Brian on the screen. Brian's done incredible work and we're eager to show our progress. He launched a screen share before anyone asked. Clicked through slides like a magician forcing a card. Diagrams, quotes, bullet points. A chart he'd labeled Ashley T's legacy structure next to one titled Phoenix Flow, Future State. He even added a thank you slide at the end. None of this would have been possible without Ashley's foundational efforts. We're proud of the transition. My jaw didn't move. Mayu leaned forward. Before we proceed, she said softly, I'd like to address a concern. Lucas blinked. Sure, of course. Mayu pulled up her own screen. File, Phoenix Fraud Full Zip. I recognized it immediately. Every file I'd compiled, every screenshot, every translation, every forged memo, every fabricated quote with my name on it. But she didn't explain it. She let the silence do it for her. Click. She opened the access audit. Click. The altered thresholds. Click. The email from Brian with the words, per Ashley's recent changes. She zoomed in on the timestamp, the metadata, the revision log. Lucas cleared his throat. I think there's been a misunderstanding. That document wasn't finalized. Brian must have used a draft. The draft was distributed to legal, Mayu said, and to your third-party vendor, as confirmation of compliance. Are you suggesting that was accidental? Lucas stammered. Brian was pale, eyes darting like he was looking for the eject button. Mr. Zhang finally spoke. We were unaware Ashley was being transitioned. She is fluent in Mandarin, correct? Lucas blinked. Yes, I believe she studied in China for 5 years, holds a certification in regulatory Mandarin. Did you know that? Lucas opened his mouth, closed it. Mayu continued, still calm. Several of the documents in your Phoenix proposal use Ashley's name. We've confirmed those attributions are false. She did not draft, approve, or review those files. The translations used were pulled from legacy documents and modified using her archived templates. Lucas looked at Brian. Brian spoke up, voice shaking. Lucas told me to use the format. I thought she approved it. You forged her approval, Mayu said. Then she turned to me. Ashley, do you have anything to add? I looked straight at the camera. Just one thing. I pulled up my own file. Phoenix Deck, original.pptx slide 6. The quote, the new system eliminates redundancy while improving clarity. Ashley T. I clicked the revision log, showed my email. The actual line? Removing compliance steps for speed is like skipping parachute checks to save time. Might work, until it doesn't. Silence. Lucas deflated in real time, like watching a parade balloon pop in slow motion. Mr. Zhang turned off his camera for a moment, then returned. Effective immediately, Lucas R. is placed on administrative leave. An external audit will follow. Brian's internship is concluded. Ashley. He paused. You will now report directly to Tokyo. Title, Director of Global Payroll Compliance. My inbox dinged. New contract. Signed by Mr. Zhang himself. I nodded once, still not smiling. Because this wasn't a happy ending. It was justice. Lucas tried a final Hail Mary. I was just trying to modernize. Make things leaner. I didn't know she was watching every step. I cut him off. I wasn't watching. I was listening. You just never thought I understood you. And then in Mandarin, I said, you thought I didn't understand. I remembered every single word. Mayu nodded slightly, and Mr. Zhang smiled for the first time that morning. Meeting adjourned, he said. Click. Call ended. Lucas sat motionless. Brian looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. I gathered my things. No speech, no strut, just calm. Fluent, quiet power. Because revenge doesn't always scream. Sometimes it speaks in perfect Mandarin.